Kundagiri Govardhan ki jai, Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Mayapur Dham ki jai, Yamuna Mai ki jai, Ganga Mai ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Tulasi Maharani ki jai, Samaveda Bhaktavinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Namo Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Vishnu Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shanivani Paschadadeshatarine. Hare Krishna. Just give me 1 second. I have to get a cup of water for myself. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, The Creation, Chapter 9, The Passing Away of Bhishmadev, Text 26. Purusha Swabhava Vihitan Yatha Varnam Yatha Shramam Vairagya Ragupadibhyam Amnato Bhayalakshanam Purusha Swabhava Vihitan Yatha Varnam Yatha Shramam Vairagya Ragupadibhyam Amnato Bhayalakshanam Purusha Swabhava Vihitan Yata Varnam Yata Shramam Vairagya Ragopadibhyam Amnato Bhayalakshanan. Everyone chant, please.
Purusha Swabhava Vihitan Yata Varnam Yata Shramam Vairagya Ragupadibhyam Amnato Bhayalakshanam.
Purusha Swabhava Vihitan Yatha Varnam Yatha Shramam Vairagya Ragupadibhyam Amnato Bhayalakshanam.
Hare Krishna. Purusha Swabhava Vihitan Yatha Varnam Yatha Shramam Vairagya Ragopadibhyam Amnato Bhayalakshanam. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Purusha Swabhava Vihitan Yatha Varna Yatha Shramam Vairagya Rago Padidhyam Amnato Bhaya Lakshanan. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else? Okay, word for word translation. Purusha, the human being, Swabhava, by his own acquired qualities. Vihitan, prescribed. Yata, according to. Varnam, classification of castes. Yata, according to. Ashramam, orders of life. Vairagya, detachment. Raga, attachment. Upadibhyam, out of such designations. Amnata, systematically. Ubhaya, both. Lakshanan, symptoms. Translation. As at Maharaj Yudhishthira's inquiry, Bhishma Dev first defined all the classifications of castes and orders of life in terms of the individual's qualifications. Then he systematically, in twofold divisions, described counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. This is quite a long purport. The conception of 4 castes and 4 orders of life as planned by the Lord himself, Bhagavad Gita 4:13, is to accelerate transcendental qualities of the individual person so that he may gradually realize his spiritual identity and thus act accordingly to get free from material bondage or conditional life. In almost all the Puranas, the subject matter is described in the same spirit, and so also in the Mahabharata, it is more elaborately described by Bhishma Dev in the Shanti Parva, beginning from the 60th chapter. The Varnashram Dharma is prescribed for the civilized human being, just to train him to successfully terminate human life. Self-realization is distinguished from the life of the lower animals engaged in eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating. Bhishma Dev advised for all human beings 9 qualifications. 1, not to become angry. 2, not to lie. 3, to equally distribute wealth. 4, to forgive. 5, to beget children only by one's legitimate wife. 6, to be pure in mind and hygienic in body. 7, not to be inimical toward anyone. 8, to be simple. And 9, to support servants or subordinates. One cannot be called a civilized person without acquiring the above-mentioned preliminary qualities. Besides these, the brahmanas, the intelligent men, the administrative men, the mercantile community, and the laborer class must acquire special qualities in terms of occupational duties mentioned in all the Vedic scriptures. For the intelligent men, controlling the senses is the most essential qualification. It is the basis of morality. Sex indulgence, even with a legitimate wife, must also be controlled, and thereby family control will automatically follow. An intelligent fat man abuses his great qualification if he does not follow the Vedic way of life. This means he must seriously make a study of the Vedic literatures, especially of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita. For learning Vedic knowledge, one must approach a person who is 100% engaged in devotional service. He must not do things which are forbidden in the Shastras. A person cannot be a teacher if he drinks or smokes. In the modern system of education, the teacher's academic qualification is taken into consideration without evaluation of his moral life. Therefore, the result of education is misuse of high intelligence in so many ways. The Kshatriya, the member of the administrative class, is especially advised to give charity and not to accept charity in any circumstances. Modern administrators raise subscriptions for some political functions, but never give charity to the citizens in any state function. It is just the reverse in the injunctions of the Shastras. The administrative class must be well versed in the Shastras, but must not take to the profession of teachers. The administrators should never pretend to become nonviolent and thereby go to hell. When Arjuna wanted to become a nonviolent coward on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he was severely chastised by Lord Krishna. The Lord degraded Arjuna at that time to the status of an uncivilized man for his avowed acceptance of the cult of nonviolence. The administrative class must be personally trained in military education, Cowards should not be elevated to the presidential throne by dint of numerical votes only. The monarchs were all chivalrous personalities, and therefore monarchy should be maintained provided the monarch is regularly trained in the occupational duties of a king. In fighting, the king or the president should never return home without being hurt by the enemy. The so-called king of today never visits the warfield. He is very much expert in artificially encouraging the fighting strength in the hope of false national prestige. As soon as the administrative class is turned into a gang of mercantile and laborer men, the whole machinery of government becomes polluted. The Vaishyas, the members of the mercantile communities, are especially advised to protect the cows. Cow protection means increasing the milk production, namely curd and butter. Agriculture and distribution of the foodstuff are the primary duties of the mercantile community, backed by education and Vedic knowledge and trained to give in charity. As the Kshatriyas were given charge of the protection of the citizens, Vaishyas were given the charge of the protection of animals. Animals are never meant to be killed. Killing of animals is a symptom of barbarian society. For a human being, agricultural produce, fruits, and milk are sufficient and compatible foodstuffs. The human society should give more attention to animal protection. The productive energy of the laborer is misused when he is occupied by industrial enterprises. Industry of various types cannot produce the essential needs of man, namely rice, wheat, grains, milk, fruits, and vegetables. The production of machine and machine tools increases the artificial living fashion of a class of vested interests and keeps thousands of men in starvation and unrest. This should not be the standard of civilization. The Sudra class is less intelligent and should have no independence. They are meant for rendering sincere service to the three higher sections of the society. The Shudra class can attain all comforts of life simply by rendering service to the higher classes. It is especially enjoined that a Shudra should never bank money. As soon as the Shudras accumulate wealth, it will be misused for sinful activities in wine, women, and gambling. Wine, women, and gambling indicate that the population is degraded to less than Sudra quality. The higher caste should always look after the maintenance of the Shudras, and they should provide them with old and used garments. A Shudra should not leave his master when the master is old and invalid, and the master should keep the servant satisfied in all respects. The Sudras must first of all be satisfied by sumptuous food and clothing before any sacrifice is performed. In this age, so many functions are held by spending millions, but the poor laborer is not sumptuously fed or given charity, clothing, etc. The laborers are thus dissatisfied, and so they make agitation. The Varnas are, so to speak, classifications of different occupations, and ashram dharma is the gradual progress on the path of self-realization. Both are interrelated, and one is dependent on the other. The main purpose of ashram dharma is to awaken knowledge and detachment. The brahmachari ashram is the training ground for the prospective candidates. In this ashram, it is instructed that this material world is not actually the home of the living being. The conditioned souls under material bondage are prisoners of matter, and therefore self-realization is the ultimate aim of life. The whole system of ashram dharma is a means to detachment. One who fails to assimilate the spirit of detachment is allowed to enter into family life with the same spirit of detachment. Therefore, one who attains detachment may at once adopt the fourth order, namely renounced, and thus live on charity only, not to accumulate wealth, but just to keep body and soul together for ultimate realization. Household life is for one who is attached, and the vanaprastha and sannyas orders of life are for those who are detached from material life. The brahmachari ashram is especially meant for training both the attached and the detached. Purusha swabhava vihitan yata varnam yatashramam vairagya ragopadibhyam amnato bhaya lakshanan. At Maharaj Yudhishthira's inquiry, Bhishmadev first defined all the classifications of castes and orders of life in terms of the individual's qualifications. Then he systematically, in twofold divisions, described counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaurvani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shanipati Paschitadi Shatarine. That's a very deep and powerful purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Bhagavatam in this section does not take a lot of time discussing the particulars of Varnashram Dharma, which Bhishmadev instructed at length to Yudhishthira. It's just basically mentioned in this verse. And then in the next verse, he moves along to the next subject. But Prabhupada took the opportunity to explain in very good detail, not overly detailed, but enough so we can actually really understand what these 4 varnas and 4 ashrams are, what they're for, and what the qualifications and duties are for all of them. So very brilliant purport expanding this idea. And all of Prabhupada's verses and translations and purports are brilliant. But one phrase really jumped out at me in today's verse that I thought was particularly brilliant and really very insightful and importful. And that's this phrase, counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. This is a very interesting phrase and a very deep phrase. And we'll sort of pick that apart here for a while. Counteraction by detachment in this particular context is referring to the ashram system, which Prabhupada explains the whole ashram system. Training in brahmacharya, then one could either remain renounced and go on to vanaprastha and sannyas, or one could go on to married life, which in the ashram system is also a life of renunciation. So counteraction by detachment is this ashram system. And interaction by attachment is the varna system. You're interacting, you're acting in this material world and interacting with the world around you by your different duties, by the duties of teaching, by the duties of ruling, the duties of producing and entrepreneurship, and the duties of serving. You're interacting with the world around you and with the rest of society. Because that Varnashram society is not one person, it's a society. It's whole large groups of people all interacting together. And this interaction by attachment is the program for the smooth and peaceful going on business of society to go on. So why is he explaining this Varnashram? Why is Bhishmadev explaining it? Why is Prabhupada explaining it? Well, it's very important in the particulars, Bhishmadev preaching to Yudhishthira's life, living as he was at that time, roughly 5,000 years ago. Varnashram Dharma was essential to his function as a king. And it's at the root of Krishna's arguments for Arjuna to fight the battle of Kurukshetra, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport, and essential to the running of society. So he's for that reason, he's explaining it there. And why else? Because the Varnashram system is ultimately meant for the purpose of Krishna consciousness. That's the ultimate purpose. Counteraction by detachment. Why become detached? What's the value in that? Because it allows one to advance in spiritual life. And interaction by attachment. Why try to arrange a logical and reasonable and simple and peaceful means of material life and sustenance of the individual and the family and society? Because it gives the peaceful and conducive atmosphere to advance in spiritual life. Chaturvarnyam Maya Shrishtam. It was created by Krishna. So therefore we can understand Krishna's purpose is always for his pleasure and the pleasure of his devotees and the advancement of everyone to the advancement of everyone in this material world in Krishna consciousness. So because he created Varnashram, we can assume that this is the ultimate purpose of Varnashram. We heard before, like in the teachings of Queen Kunti, about how Krishna comes for many purposes, but ultimately it's for his pleasure and for the pleasure of his devotees. So same thing with Varnashram. It serves so many material purposes in society, but the ultimate purpose is, again, always devotional service. And devotional service means Krishna's pleasure and the advancement and pleasure of all the other living entities who are Krishna's parts and parcels. The Puranas say, I think it's Padma Purana. Varnashrama charvata purushena parak puman vishnora radite panta nanya tato shakaranam. Varnashram is meant for pleasing Krishna. Nanya tato shakaranam. Krishna is worshipped through the Varnashram system, and it's specifically meant for pleasing Krishna and not for any other purpose. Nanya tato shakaranam. And again, we heard also not too long ago in the Bhagavatam again, in the second chapter, Atak Pumbir Dvija Shreshtas, Varnashrama Vibhagasa, Swanushtitasya Dharmasya, Samsit here Haritoshanam. The same idea is being given there, that the perfection of the performance of Varnashram duties is Swanushtitasya Dharmasya. Some said here their perfection is Hari Toshanam, the pleasure of Lord Hari. So Tat Tosha Karanam means it's for the pleasure of Krishna, and Hari Toshanam, it's for the pleasure of Krishna. So both of these verses are stressing this, that the purpose of Varnashram is devotional service. So this is why Varnashram is there. It's to enable and to encourage the practice of bhakti yoga, to give a situation, a life, a society, an environment where devotional service is encouraged and made very natural and very easy. Now there are so many social systems, economic systems, and political systems, and we can, but I won't, argue their different merits and demerits. The capitalism, the socialism, democracy, monarchy, all these different things. But in this world, none of them are conducive to devotional service. Rather, all of them are the opposite. They're obstructive to a peaceful life. They're obstructive to a pure and simple life, and they're obstructive to the principles of devotional service. So this is the value of Varnashram Dharma, to enable bhakti to happen. And even within Varnashram, just like the modern political systems are all failures, spiritually speaking, even Varnashram has to be done in the right way. It's created by Krishna, Chaturvarna Maya Shrishtam, Guna Karma Vibhagasha. That this Varnashram system is determined by the person's actual behavior, by the person's actual qualification. We all know about the modern incorrect caste system of India today, where it's not based on qualification, and it's not based on one's actual work and one's actual performance and qualification, but it's based on birth. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada talked about Daivi Varnashram. Daivi Varnashram, Daivi means godly or divine. Varnashram means that it's done, everyone is classified according to actually how they behave, actually by how they work, by their actual qualifications in life. Because if it's done by birth, then it simply becomes a mode of oppression, that the rich will oppress the poor, the so-called Brahmanas will oppress the so-called Sudras, and they're all less than Sudras because they're misunderstanding the entire purpose and process of Varnashram Dharma. So we want Daivi Varnashram. The opposite of Daivi is Asuri. The current method in India of determining by birth, this is Asuri. It's not divine, it's demonic Varnashram. It's a cause of oppression, it's a cause of exploitation. And also in today's verse, I think aren't the same words there, Lakshanam. Yes, Amnato Bhaya Lakshanam. Lakshanam means by actual symptoms, that these things, and Amnato Bhaya Ubhaya Lakshanam, that these two things, Varna and Ashram, are determined by a person's actual symptoms, not by any other material qualification, or that, oh, a person is a king because they were born the son of a king. There are so many corrupt monarchical lineages still existing in the world today. And they're so ridiculously, pathetically unqualified to lead, even materially unqualified to lead, what to speak of spiritually. Or even in the West, where we have democracy, there are still, political lineages, the Kennedys, just because of the Kennedy name, they gain entrance into politics. We've had two presidents that were Bushes. We almost had two presidents that were Clintons. So this is not how government should really be arranged. It should be by quality, by Lakshanam. And that word Lakshanam is also used. Yudhishthira was also instructed in Varnashram by Srila Narada Muni, who expressed the same thing. I think this is in the 7th canto. Yasya la Lakshanam proktam pumso varna bivyanjakam yaranya trapi drishyeta tattenava vinidishet. This is Daivi Varnashram, that the Varnashram system is determined Yasya la Lakshanam proktam, by the actual symptoms that the person manifests. Their Varna and Ashram is determined. And if they're one so-called one Varna, just like someone's born in a Brahmana family and says, yes, I'm a Brahmana, but if he has the quality of a Sudra, then Narada Muni says, then he's considered a Sudra, not a Brahmana. So this is the important qualification of Varnashram Dharma. But then the question can be raised, this Varnashram Dharma is useful, it's conducive, but is it devotional service? Srila Rupa Goswami explains in the Nectar of Devotion that Varnashram Dharma may be helpful, but it is not actually devotional service in the sense that the other angas of bhakti are actually devotional service. And he describes that even persons who are completely devoid of any concept of Varnashram Dharma, if they take up devotional service, then they're qualified. This is from, this is from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Srila Rupa Goswami says that every human being is qualified for bhakti, just like anyone could take advantage of bathing in a sacred river. And then he quotes the Padma Purana. He says which says that there is a country where the Antyajas live. Antyajas means the lowest of castes. Actually, Antyaja means outside of, so low that they're outside of the Varnashram Dharma. Like there's the English word outcast. So these Antyajas are outcasts, but they've all received Vaishnav Diksha, and therefore they're as effulgent and as glorified as any sacrificial priest. So without any conception of Varnashram Dharma, they're qualified and purified just by bhakti. And he goes on to explain furthermore that if someone is a bhakta or an aspiring bhakta, if they neglect the angas of bhakti, the important angas of bhakti, like the first, he specifically is referring to the first 10 and the first 20 in the list given in Nectar of Devotion. And he's also referring to the 5 very important items of devotional service, which he explains: Nam Kirtan, Bhagavat Shravana, Archamurti, Sadhu Sangha, and Mathura Vas. He says that if a person who's an aspiring bhakta, if he neglects those things, but does his varnashram dharma very perfectly, then he's at fault and he needs to correct himself. But if a person is performing all of the angas of bhakti nicely and completely neglects the varnashram dharma, then there's no fault in him. And he quotes from the 5th chapter of the 1st canto, a very nice verse. Yaktastra dharmam charanam bujam harer bhajana pakvo tapatet tato yadi yatra kvavabhajam abura musyakim kovarta apto bhajatam swadharmata. One who has forsaken his material occupation to engage in the devotional service of the Lord may sometimes fall down while in an immature stage, yet there is no danger of his being unsuccessful. On the other hand, a non-devotee, though fully engaged in occupational duties, does not gain anything. So varnashram dharma is helpful, and many things are helpful, although they may not be exactly direct angas of bhakti. So we can use those things, and we should certainly engage in those things. Just like varnashram, we want to have a peaceful life, a life where our needs are met in a reasonable way, and we can live peacefully without disturbance. And that's very helpful and very conducive for a sincere devotee, because it enables him to peacefully engage in devotional service. But it's not that a comfortable life in and of itself is devotional service. So that should be understood. So this is the value. It's not an anga of bhakti, but it provides the peace, the stability, and the sanity, both on a societal and individual level, so that we could go on engaging in devotional service. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada preached about and was interested in introducing varnashram dharma, or at least aspects of it. And this is actually the one case where varnashram dharma is actual bhakti. If the spiritual master says, develop varnashram dharma, then the devotee who is pursuing that as under the instruction of his spiritual master, in that case, that is directly devotional service, because it's on the order of the spiritual master. But this principle, counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment, is a much broader concept, actually, a much deeper concept than just referring to varnas and ashrams. In the varnashram dharma sense, counteraction by detachment is the ashram system, because the ashram system is simply meant for renunciation. Brahmachari, vanaprastha, and sannyas are extremely renounced, and grihastas are allowed a little license, but even that is very strongly restricted. And interaction by attachment is the varna system for engagement in the world. But it's a much broader concept than just varnashram. Because for better or for worse, we don't have anything even remotely resembling varnashram, but we still want to go on with our devotional service, but we could still learn from this verse and this concept of this is again, counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. Knowing how to simultaneously cultivate detachment from the material world and from the materialistic concept of life, and at the same time developing attachment for Krishna, and knowing how to engage properly within this world, This is also counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. And this is foundational to properly understanding and properly advancing in spiritual life. So counteraction by detachment, this means that when we break our attachment for sense gratification and for material life, then our entanglement in material life becomes counteracted. This is counteraction by detachment. By becoming detached from material life, our material entanglement is counteracted. Therefore, for example, at the most basic level, Srila Prabhupada gave us 4 regulative principles. These 4 regulative principles are counteractive. They're counteracting the flow of material life, the flow of materialistic society, and the flow of material desires. It's counteracting that and enabling us to become detached from that materialistic life. No meat eating, no illicit sex, no intoxication, no gambling. And furthermore, it's explained how this detachment is essential, because attachment within this material world leads to our destruction. Dhyayata vishayan pumsa sangasteshu pajayate. That when you contemplate dhyayato, you meditate on the objects of the senses, you think of the objects of the senses, sangasteshu pajayate, then attachment to them arises. And then sangat sanjayate kama, when the attachment arises, then you develop lust. You develop a desire to enjoy those objects of the senses. Kamat kroto bijayate, and from that anger develops. Anger because you want to preserve your sense gratification and not let others have it, so you get angry at others. Or when time and circumstances denies you of your sense gratification, then you become frustrated and become angry. Krodad bhavati sammoha, that anger leads you to become completely bewildered about the purpose of life. Samohat smriti vibrama, then your memory is spoiled. Memory is spoiled means you forget what the goal of life is. You forget what your duty is, and you forget what proper behavior is. Samohat smriti vibrama. Smriti brahmsad buddhi nasho. When that happens, you lose all your intelligence. And when your intelligence is lost, buddhi nashat pranashyati. Pranashyati means you're destroyed. You're not, the soul is never destroyed, but your chances at spiritual life are destroyed. Pranashyati means completely destroyed. And all of that starts from meditating on the objects of the senses and becoming attached to them. So we want counteraction by detachment. If we want detachment, then we need to understand. That's why this verse is so nice. Just like think of any circumstance where you have one thing causing another. If A causes B, and B causes C, and C causes D, and D causes E, and the last thing E is you're destroyed, then you want to go to the root and stop that from happening, because you don't want to be destroyed. And if you say, well, A, B, C, D, E, if E is my destruction, I'll just stop D, because D is what causes E. So it looks like, oh, if I stop D, then I'll be saved from destruction. But even if you try to stop D, if you don't stop C, C will cause D, which will again lead to your destruction. And then if you try to stop C, but B is still there, so you need to go to the root. So the root is controlling the mind and the senses from meditating on the objects of the senses and preventing that attachment from happening. So this is, again, the process of devotional service. Or as Baladev Vidyabhushan puts it in his commentary on these verses, he says, even if you control your senses, if you don't control your mind, then you're still lost, because the inevitable will happen. That the progression A, B, C, D, E is inevitable if you don't control the root cause. So this is counteraction by detachment. again, going back to the Varnashram system, in the ashrams, 75% of the ashram system is dedicated to this detachment, to this renunciation, and only the grihasta is allowed a little material engagement under very strict restriction. So this is the importance of counteraction by detachment, being detached in material life, controlling the mind, controlling the senses, not engaging in sinful activities or all the host of forbidden and bad activities that interfere with our devotional service. So this is counteraction by detachment, but this is not complete, and this is not enough in and of itself. Just as Varnashram, when properly utilized, is useful in the performance of devotional service, but it's not an anga of bhakti. Therefore, it's not sufficient by itself. Renunciation is similar. Renunciation is very useful, and detachment is very useful in devotional service, especially for one who is a sadhana bhakta. It's very useful, but it's not devotional service in and of itself. And we've seen so many examples of big sages who were very renounced, so austere and so renounced, but were not able to understand devotional service. And because of that, they would ultimately fall down from their position of imagined superiority. So many great sages were meditating, and then some Devi Dasi from the heavenly planets comes, and boom, they're done. So counteraction by detachment alone is insufficient. You also need interaction by attachment. This interaction by attachment has two facets. One is, like the Varnashram system, taking sane but not overdone care to make sure that our material life is peaceful, honest, simple, non-sinful, and conducive to a life of devotional service. Everyone has to work, make a living, find a house. Most of us will find a family. All these things are happening. And interaction by attachment means living them in such a way that they're conducive and not counteracting our advancement in devotional service. And the other side is more directly an anga of bhakti. That interaction by attachment means interaction directly taking part in the actual activities of devotional service. On the negative side is detachment from the material life, but on the positive side has to be attachment to Krishna by engaging in the process of Krishna conscious, by actually chanting, by actually serving, by actually bowing down, by actually associating with devotees, actually worshiping the deities. This is the interaction by attachment. We are interacting within the process of devotional service and developing our attachment to Krishna. This is the interaction by attachment that we want. So like Prabhupada said, he said this Krishna consciousness is very simple. 4 no's and 1 yes. So the 4 no's, the regulative principles, is in a very brief summarized form, the counteraction by detachment. And the one yes, chant Hare Krishna, chant 16 rounds. This is the interaction by attachment in very simplified form. And if we don't have a balance, if we're too attached in material life, too engaged in material life, then it becomes very difficult to engage in devotional service. Bhogaishwarya prasaktanam taya parita chetasam vyavasayatmika buddhi samadhuna vidyate. To engage in devotional service takes some real focus, some real mental energy, some real one-pointedness, some real samadhi, the word is used, samadhuna vidyate. And if we're Bhogaishwarya prasaktanam, if we're too interested in unnecessary material opulence, material comfort, material sense gratification too much, then the resolution needed for the actual engagement in devotional service will not happen. So an intelligent devotee needs to balance those. Just like brahmacharya ashram is training for everyone, and then most of those will go on to be grihastas. But because they've had the training, they don't go insane with sense gratification. Now that they're given a little facility, they're controlled. Let's see. And the way this is done is by the training and detachment, and also by the engagement in devotional service. Because again, just like I said about the big sages who are detached and renounced, but they can't maintain it. They'll fall down because they don't have the shelter of devotional service. Because detachment by itself cannot last. You can, if you want to control your senses, you can take a vow, and you can, grit your teeth and, control yourself and do it for some time. But that's very difficult. That's difficult to do and will often end in failure, even if you manage to do it for your whole life. Of course, if it's something like sinful life, even if that's our only basis, we have to do that. But that's not a sustainable type of renunciation. There's a more sustainable type of renunciation, a more sustainable type of detachment. And that's also described in Bhagavad Gita. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya nam rasavarjam raso pyasya param drishpa nivartate. That you could grit your teeth and control your senses. But if internally you're not purified, if you're still dhyayata vishaya pumsam, if you're still internally meditating on the objects of the senses, you won't be able to maintain it. But rasavarjam raso pyasya param drishtra nivartate. But if you're able to get a higher taste, then you're actually able to maintain your detachment and maintain your renunciation. And this is the merging in Krishna consciousness of the counteraction by detachment and the interaction by attachment. In Krishna consciousness, these two things actually become the two sides of the same coin. That you practice detachment so that you can have the determination and the peacefulness and the freedom to engage in devotional service. And the more you engage in devotional service, the more you get the higher taste of a life dedicated to Krishna, and you're more and more easily able to renounce the things of this material world. Actually, we've discussed several times before about how in devotional service, the pleasure of devotional service is so great that it surpasses even the pleasure of sense gratification and the pleasure of liberation at the stage of sadhana bhakti. And at the stage of bhava bhakti, that pleasure is so great that it makes a mockery of the pleasure of liberation. And at the stage of prema bhakti, that pleasure is so great that you can't even perceive the existence of the so-called pleasures of the material world. And then there's no question of detachment. You don't even, the whole concept of sense gratification doesn't even make sense anymore. So this is the two sides, the detachment and the engagement. The engagement, and again, the engagement means having a sane material life that will enable us to freely and peacefully engage in devotional service. And most importantly, that engagement means actual engagement in the activities of devotional service, approaching a spiritual master, inquiring from the spiritual master, serving the spiritual master. And the 5 very important activities of devotional service: chanting the holy name of Krishna, associating with the devotees of Krishna, Nam Kirtan, Sadhu Sangha, Bhagavat Shravan, hearing, studying the Srimad Bhagavatam and all of Srila Prabhupada's books, Mathuravas, residing in the holy place, or at least visiting the holy place, which also includes the temple, and Mathuravas, Archa Murti Shraddhaya Sevan, and worshiping the deity form of the Lord. So this kind of engagement, we arrange our life in such a way to make the engagement in these things very peaceful and natural and easy. And by engaging in these things, we will naturally, our attachment for sense gratification and our attachment for material life will fall away. This is the purpose of the whole Varnashram Dharma system. And when we have no Varnashram community actually existing, then this is how we live our life on our own and with our family and with our community. As much as possible, we try to live our life like that. And finally, let's look at the Bhagavad Gita in its entirety, 18 chapters. It's analyzed in different ways sometimes, but Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita are mainly karma yoga. And karma yoga means how to engage. It means interaction by attachment, how to engage in the activities of this world and spiritualize it. And the last 6 chapters, he says, are mainly jnana yoga. And jnana yoga means understanding the distinction between matter and spirit and becoming detached and renounced from materialistic life. And the middle 6 chapters are describing devotional service specifically. Now, this is just one analysis, and there are some, we could see it in another way, the early chapters that describe how you're not your body and like that. This is also kind of jnana yoga, distinguishing matter from spirit. And actually every chapter covers all of these things in different ways. But this is Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti's analysis, and he creates a very beautiful analogy. He says the Bhagavad Gita, the total Bhagavad Gita, is like a treasure chest. And the first 6 chapters, which talk about karma yoga, are the bottom of the, like the box, the container of this treasure chest. And the last 6 chapters of jnana, and that bottom of the chest, that base of the chest, is made of pure gold. So this is the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita. And the final 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, jnana, are the lid of the chest, which is made of pure gold and is decorated with jewels. And he says specifically, this lid is decorated with 64 jewels. And he says those 64 jewels are the 64 syllables of the 2 Bhagavad Gita verses, 1865 and 1866. And these 2 verses, he says, are the key or the direction, how to open up that treasure chest and open it up and go inside to get the actual treasure of bhakti. So this is very beautifully put. And these verses 65 and 66 also express this concept of detachment, counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyajimam namaskaru mame vaishyasi satyam te pratijani priyosime. This is the perfection of interaction by attachment. Manmana, you have a mind, you have a brain, you're going to think of something. So Krishna says, think of me, engage your mind in me. Bhava Mad Bhakto, you have to be something. You may be Brahmana, so-called Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, Sannyas. But he says, Mad Bhakto, become my devotee. What's that? Look, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Naham Vipro Nacha Narapatir Napi Vaishyo Nasujo Naham Varni Nacha Griha Patir Navanosta Yatir Va Kinto Pradyan Nikila. I can't, there's a couple of words I'm missing, and then he finishes Gopi part. What's that last line, Mata? Yes, Purnamrita, dear.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'm not any of these Varnashram designations, upadis. I am the servant of the servant of the servant of Krishna, the Lord of the Gopis. Madhyajimam, you have to do some work. So make that work a sacrifice to Krishna. Namaskaru, bow down to Krishna. All of these things, in this way, you become dear to Krishna. So this is the perfection of interaction by attachment. You're interacting, you're engaging in the process of devotional service and becoming dear to Krishna, becoming a devotee, becoming attached to Krishna. And the next verse, 66, Sarva Dharman Prityaja, Mame Kam Sharanam Vraja. This is detachment. Give up all the dharma. And this means Varna, it's almost humorous actually, that Krishna spends so much time and energy using the Varnashram Dharma argument to get Arjuna to fight. But in the end, he says, Sarva Dharman Prityaja, give up this Varnashram Dharma, give up all other dharmas and surrender to me exclusively. This is the perfection of counteraction by detachment, sacrificing everything else and only surrendering to Krishna. And if you do that, there's no loss, do not fear. There'll be no sinful reaction, there'll be no problem, you do that. So this is the perfection in devotional service of counteraction by detachment and interaction by attachment. Again, these things are, I analyze them separately, but they're two sides of the same coin. When you become detached from material life, it gives you facility to become attached to Krishna. And the more you become attached to Krishna, the more you engage in Krishna consciousness, the more you arrange your material life in such a way that Krishna consciousness is elevated and sense gratification is decreased, then you more naturally become detached from material life. So with or without Varnashram Dharma, this is our process, this is our goal, to do like this, the simultaneously detachment and attachment. And I've said many times before how Prabhupada gives the example of the tala, the scale, that when one side goes up on the balance scale, the other side goes down. And when one side goes down on the balance scale, the other side goes up. So if we put too much weight on the attachment, on the materialistic side of the scale, then that will, or if we raise the side of the scale with material life, then the devotional service attachment to Krishna's side will go down. And if we elevate the side of devotional service, then naturally the material life will go down. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Is there any question or comment or discussion on this? Yes, Prabhu, raising your hand, just unmute yourself and speak up.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare
My
Krishna.
question is, as a identification when a being is born, human being, knowing this different levels of ashrams, how would one categorize himself in terms of behavior? Because that identification of judging, is it a predetermined or it is based on certain governing factors? So not clear with like it could be a mental speculation at some point, like it could be identifying in the wrong class. I completely agree that whatever is said with counteraction and a part of it, and the way the current society is. But yeah, if you can share some insight on this.
Yeah, there's how to determine what our Varna ashram should be.
Yep.
In one sense, because there's no society for it to actually fit into, one may question how important it is to do that. And for those of us who are not living in any kind of Varnashram society, then I would just say, just find a job that doesn't sap your life energy and devote as much time as possible to Krishna consciousness. But if you actually want to examine in Varnashram terms, and there are three basic guidelines. Krishna explains two of them in Bhagavad Gita. Guna karma. Chaturvarna maya shrishtam guna karma. So what are your qualifications? Are you attracted to a life of simplicity? And different people will be attracted to different things. A life of simplicity, a life of study and scholarship and austerity. Are you attracted? Do you have a tendency that you want to control, that you want to rule, that you want to protect and give service to others under your care? Are you an entrepreneur? Just like I have a friend who, a longtime friend, lives down in Alachua, and he's worked different jobs, and he hates working for a boss. It's almost intolerable for him. So he's an entrepreneur. He tries to run his own business, start his own business, be his own boss. This is a Vaishya quality. A Vaishya can't work for a boss. And then others may be comfortable working for a boss. It's simple. I don't have to start a whole business myself or manage a whole business. I have a job, I do it, and I get my salary. So these qualities are there. Guna karma, how are you actually working? You may say, oh, I have the quality of a scholar or this or that, but for my actual job, I'm pulling a rickshaw. So this is contradictory. So guna and karma. And then finally, in the 7th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, where Varnashram is described at some length, and that verse, Yasya Lal Lakshanam Prokta, comes from that section of Narada Muni teaching Yudhishthira about Varnashram. And there is the third item, which is vritti. Vritti means livelihood. How are you making your livelihood? A brahmana's only livelihood is accepting charity, or he's also allowed, a brahmana is also allowed to grow his own food, not agriculture as a business, but just growing a little bit for himself, or going out into the market or into the fields after the harvest is done and picking up little scattered bits of grain and little scattered bits of vegetables that are left over after the harvest. He's allowed to do that. So that's the vritti, the livelihood of a brahmana. Someone may say, I'm very scholarly by nature, and I even work as a scholar, but I get a salary, just like a college professor. A college professor is not a brahmana because he's vritti is that of a sudra, that he's doing a job and receiving a salary for it. Or similarly, if one claims to be a Vaishya, but he's getting a salary, or if Prabhupada specifically mentioned in italics in today's verse, if one is a king, but he's living off of charity, that's completely forbidden. Only the brahmana can live off of charity. So the interaction of these three things, what are your qualities and qualifications and inclinations? What is the actual work you do, and how do you make your living? These are the three basic determinants. And again, without an actual working Varnashram system, you could question how important it is to do that. More important, more relevant might be to just find a job, a livelihood that you can live comfortably enough that you're peaceful and doesn't take up your whole life, doesn't involve you in sinful activities, and allows you to engage in devotional service. But those are the ideas of how to determine Varnashram. Does that help at all?
Absolutely. I think so. You made an absolute valid point for me. Thank you.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Anything else? Yes, Jona Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Acharya Prabhu, thank you very much for a very detailed class, going through that whole purport and explaining all those points. I wanted to ask about the implementation of, I guess, Varnashram when it comes to
You may be asking the wrong person, but go ahead. And
well, specifically when it comes to, I guess, performing devotional service. So sometimes we may say, well, this is more of a Brahminical devotee, or more of a, a devotee that has Kshatriya characteristics, or that is a Vaishya, natural. So at the same time, we hear that it's the devotional service is transcendental. So at what point, is there a point when the Varnashram system is just simply superficial when it comes to devotional service, or should it be, at what point should it be abandoned, or what point do we have to live by it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I don't have a direct, clear answer per se, but Srila Prabhupada himself, if you look through his discussions on this topic, he would himself refer to Varnashram Dharma in different ways at different times. Very often he would say, this Varnashram Dharma is not needed at all. You're devotees, you're transcendental, you don't need this Varnashram Dharma. And then sometimes he would say, you should develop this Varnashram community to give facility for everyone in the world to come and live peacefully and engage in devotional service. And then he would also regularly say that you need Varnashram Dharma because his devotees, are wrapped up in material life and need a peaceful situation to engage in devotional service. So Prabhupada himself at different times would take different points of view. So I'm not sure you could make a blanket statement that Varnashram Dharma is this or that. You would have to judge it according to the person, according to the situation. But like I said, I don't have an answer to summarize. I would say that we don't really need it. All of us here, we don't really have, for the most part, we have Varnashram Dharma in the sense that we may be grihastas, or we may be single brahmacharis, or some very rare percentage might be sannyasis or vanaprasth. And some of us may be businessmen, or some of us may work in this way or that way. So in that sense, but there's not really an organized Daivi Varnashram Dharma system. And we're functioning in devotional service. We're going on, we're preaching, we're doing everything. If we had that system, would we be doing better? Perhaps. But we're also functioning without it, and there doesn't seem to be any scope for it happening on any kind of wide scale anytime soon. So we go on, and we accept this principle that even if we are not transcendental, the practice of devotional service is transcendental, and we can go on with it even without Varnashram. But at the same time, those who are inspired by Srila Prabhupada's desire and Srila Prabhupada's instruction, they can also do it. And then both the devotees and the society at large could benefit from it. But like I said, I don't have a single answer because Prabhupada himself looked at it in different ways at different times. I don't know if that helps or just confuses the issue.
Yeah, I was thinking that was good. That was good. I guess zeroing in a little further, specifically with regards to categorizing devotional service, like we could, as activities that would be more Sudra related, Vaishya related, Brahminical related, or Kshatriya related.
Yeah, that's tricky and a slippery slope that maybe you could do, but I would be very careful. Prabhupada said, like in Vrindavan, he said that Krishna and Balaram are black and white, and the marble floor of the temple is black and white, and the person who's mopping the floor is as good as the pujari. So that could be, especially because we have, of course, many devotees are Brahminically inclined in different ways, but without the actual Varnashram system, that's a tricky claim to say, oh, I'm a this or you're a that in devotional service. I think in general, it's probably more wholesome and more beneficial that everyone is just recognized as a devotee. And when there's an actual Varnashram system, we could think about that and talk about that.
Very good.
Saying, oh, such and such devotee, he's a Sudra. Actually, the Gaudiya Math, they used to criticize Prabhupada, oh, he's a businessman, like that. So that's we could analyze in a theoretical way, but actually applying it to devotees is tricky, and I would, in general, shy away from it.
Thank you for that. I think it's a good thing. Just a misconception that sometimes is there, like this is Sudra service, or it's still devotional service, but say like cutting the grass or something like that. That's kind of more like Sudra related service, or taking the trash out, or taking.
Yeah, I don't think that's. I don't find that a profitable way to analyze. Devotional service is transcendental. And again, if ever it happens that there's an actual functioning Varnashram community, then those distinctions can be made. Yes, Mother Archana Bhakti, did you have your hand up?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you for the nice class. I just wanted to churn this topic further about how this Varnashram system goes well with our devotional service. And I just wanted to bring in some points from Bhakti Sandarbha that Srila Jiva Goswami discusses. So there he says that, quoting from Srimad Bhagavatam 11th canto, he says the qualification for bhakti is 100% faith. When I say bhakti, bhakti means for ananya bhakti, for pure devotional service. For someone to enter into pure devotional service, the qualification is 100% faith that this is the only thing that I have to do to get the ultimate benefit. I don't need to do anything else. If I simply did Krishna consciousness, then all my needs are fulfilled. I don't have to do anything else. Just like what you said, Sarva Dharman Parityajya, right?
Or in CC, there's Shraddha Shabda Vishwaskahi Sujada Nischai, saying the same thing.
Yes. So until one comes to that point, he is not actually entering into the path of Ananya Bhakti, pure devotional service. And then we start all the other stages. Now, for someone who has not entered into that path, so he gives this Aropa Siddha Bhakti, Jnana Mishra Bhakti, Karma Jnana Mishra Bhakti, and then Ananya Bhakti. So the people who are working outside, and so all this starts within. So when you say Varnashram system, that is according to the scriptural injunctions. You have duties for this Varna, duty for Brahmana, Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya, and you're acting according to that. Now, simply performing Varnashram without any understanding of connecting with the Supreme, that's just a karmi. There's no benefit with that type of Varnashram system. The next level up is you're performing Varnashram and your results you're giving to Krishna. Now, within that also there is categories. You're offering the result in order to get some material benefit. That is sakama. And if you're offering the result so that you don't get bondage in this material world, that is nishkama. But you're offering the result so that you can get attached to Krishna out of love for Krishna. That is actually bhakti kama, that is desirable. So really we have to see where I'm fitting in. But so why we are recommending Varnashram, because when there is a system, then Prabhupada says in one lecture that by coming into Varnashram system, you are accepting that you are a spirit soul about reincarnation, because there is karma. I am in this particular varna because of my guna, karma, and vritti, as you explained. Why I am in this particular situation? Because karma means I had a past life. I did something and I accrued this type of karma. So I'm here today, and tomorrow I'll be in another place depending on what I do. That means even without coming to the platform of bhakti, the whole society is accepting coming to the platform of spirit soul, which is very important. That's why Varnashram system is recommended. But what is happening in our present day situation is we don't have that. So this is really vikarma. What we are doing is vikarma. Now, is this an obstacle for someone to come to the platform of bhakti? Bhakti does not depend. It just depends on association. You get the association of someone, and if you are able to come to the stage of 100% Shraddha directly from vikarma, as you said, gradually take up a job and you start practicing bhakti. So while you're doing some work and you're also practicing bhakti, that is called karma mishra bhakti. You're doing bhakti, you're chanting, but you're also working, and you feel I have to do this and I have to have these things. But if you're doing it according to scriptures, that would be karma mishra bhakti. But if you're doing vikarma and you're doing some bhakti, that would be vikarma mishra bhakti. Nevertheless, you're doing bhakti. So our goal is to keep increasing our bhakti until we come to that 100% Shraddha. So is a Varnashram system helpful? Certainly it is helpful, because at least you don't have that vikarma which is pulling you down, sinful. It's not that we are intentionally performing vikarma, but we are connected with that system where there is sins involved. Unknowingly we get implicated for no reason. Yeah. So therefore it is better if we can actually come. But as you said, it's not within the capacity of one person to decide. The society has to be set like that. So we need leaders, even devotees, who can actually organize the society in such a way that people fall into this Varnashram system. Then it will be smoother for people to move towards bhakti. But even nevertheless, like all of us, we were able to, because of association of devotees, we were able to come to the platform of bhakti. Now somehow or other, if we can just focus on that aspect of increasing, bringing ourselves to the point of 100% Shraddha, then we will be on the path of Ananya Bhakti. So there, I just wanted to bring that point about the qualification for bhakti is 100% Shraddha. And how you will guide as a leader those who are in the temple or in your community based on their quality. Yeah, Varnashram system, it is not a spiritual thing. It's based on the body. But if you can use it based on that person's natural inclination, it might be helpful. But it's not about rubber stamping someone. You're a Vaishya, you're a Shudra. The idea is a person has a natural aptitude for a certain type of work, and if you can use that to help that person progress toward bhakti, of course that takes an expert leader who can actually, Srila Prabhupada did that, and there are leaders who are able to do that. So just some points that I wanted to share, Prabhuji.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's late. Thank you very much, everybody, for kindly attending, kindly hearing. Announcements about tonight, Drona Prabhu.
Sure. We have His Grace Bala Bhadra Prabhu who will be speaking tonight on Bhagavad Gita. Program begins at 4:30. We hope to see you all there. We know it's a Easter today, Easter holiday. So and we had a really fantastic kirtan program last night. So I'm hoping that devotees will come out, but naturally there may be some other commitments as well. But we hope you can all make it. It will be broadcast online if you're unable to be there in person. And then also starting tomorrow, will still be mask optional tonight, but starting tomorrow, the city of Philadelphia is implementing the mask mandate once again. So just ask the devotees to please cooperate as we go through this next phase of, I guess, the pandemic. Hopefully it'll be short-lived, but programs will continue. We'll just have to have our masks on. I'm hoping very shortly, once the weather starts to change, I think next weekend, it's actually going to be in the high 60s, 70s. We'll be able to have serve and honor prasadam outside.
Awesome.
Hare Krishna.
Jai. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.